Are you thinking about buying a house, but you can't wrap your mind around all the fees and you're worried that there's going to be a bunch of hidden fees or just fees you don't know about that are going to come as surprises? Well, you're probably right. There's a lot involved in buying a house, and a lot of buyers don't know upfront what all those fees are, when to expect them, and how much to budget for them. So if you've been sitting at home trying to save up your 3.5% down payment, but you didn't know about closing costs or inspection fees or all these things we're going to cover today, there's a lot of fees that could hit you. There are also fees people don't know about that happen after you close the transaction. There are still fees coming your way that if you don't know about and haven't budgeted for, they can really put the hurt on you. After you've paid your down payment, your closing costs, after you've paid your moving costs, then you suddenly get some surprise bills in the mail that you don't know about. That can be a real financial hardship for people. So this is number 5 in our series of answering your top 5 questions that you asked ChatGPT at 2 in the morning when you're thinking about buying a house. And number 5 was, what are the hidden fees and costs involved in buying a house? We're going to split this up for you today into 2 sections. We're going to go over fees and costs. And there really aren't any quote unquote hidden fees in real estate, but there are costs that if you're not an informed buyer, you don't know about. Then we're going to go through those buyer mistakes. What are some mistakes that buyers make frequently that we've seen over my 21 years, Dave's 25 years in the business that really cost them some money, so you can avoid those mistakes too. So don't bounce out on us early. Stick all the way to the end on this one. Once again, welcome back to the Informed Home Buyer Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Rich Curtis, and I have my co-host with me, Dave Miller. Morning, Dave. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Rich. Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm excited about this one today. A lot to talk about here.
Yeah, a lot to cover to help people wrap their mind around this so they really aren't blindsided by some fees. So let's start off with the thing right off the bat. A lot of people, when they first come to us, don't even know about closing costs. So they've, gone online, done a little research, know, okay, I need 3% for my conventional loan or 3.5% for my FHA loan. I've got it. Maybe I've got a little buffer for moving costs. I'm ready to go. They don't know there's another whole chunk of fees that we ballpark at about 3% of the purchase price there again. So can you walk them through why we're ballparking at that 3% and what's all involved in closing costs so they know what to expect?
Yep. Happy to do so, Rich. And, we talk about closing costs and hidden fees. As a lender, we disclose all fees and costs up front. Now, keep in mind that there are what I like to refer to as 3 different sets of cost or fees. So the first set is when you go buy a house and you go into escrow, there's going to be based on how the purchase contract's written, there's going to be some costs associated with or fees associated with the transaction. You got your escrow, your title, maybe some transfer tax, notary fees, recording fees. Whether you use me, Rich, or whatever realtor or loan officer you use, those are basically standard pay fees or costs. A few of those might be negotiable. Some of those, you would spend more time trying to, save a dollar that would cost you more. But as a rule, those are fees. A lot of those fees you can shop for, but they're going to be the same just about anywhere you go. Those are what we call non-recurring closing costs, and they're part of anywhere between 2 to 3% of the purchase price. And the reason why that's a pretty big window, if you're buying a $500,000 house, your closing costs could be anywhere from, I'll say like 8,000 to maybe 15,000, just basic costs, including what we call recurring closing costs. So the fees that I talked about that we would disclose to you, in fact, we disclose them all, are non-recurring closing costs and recurring costs are fees you're going to pay anyway, and they make up the largest percent of the costs associated with closing the transaction. Those are things like prepaid insurance. You have to pay a full year of homeowners or fire insurance up front. That could be, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, maybe $5,000 if you're on fair plan. That's kind of a moving target. We would know that up front before you close. And then prepaid interest. When you buy a home, mortgages are in arrears. So you prepay. If you were to close on, say, today, which is the 4th, you're going to pay 26 days of prepaid interest forward. But then you're going to skip next month. You would not have an October 1st payment. You would have a November 1st payment, which would cover you for the previous 30 days. So, and then also based on what month we close, how many months of reserves you need to have for property taxes. if you're going to impound or have property tax as a part of your payment, which if you're putting less than 20% down, you're required to anyway. So, that could be based on the time of year because taxes come due, April and December is how many months do we have to collect so that that's part of your payment. And it's all money you're going to pay anyway. It's just front loaded. So that's a big chunk of costs. Again, we spell it all out for you. Go ahead, you had a point there, Rich.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think we just had a comment the other day where someone said, which was timely for this episode, someone said, I cannot for the life of me understand why closing costs are 3%. And they had it in their head that that was a lender fee, similar to the fact that a realtor commission can be 3%. It's important that we say all commissions are negotiable. But I think the thing you're pointing out that's important that a lot of people don't understand is of that ballpark 2 to 3% closing costs. And I always use the 3% because you're happy with me if you have to pay less money and you're mad at me if you have to pay more money. So I always go with the 3%. But of that, a big chunk, the lion's share, is actually you just prepaying your own bills. That's what a recurring closing cost is. These are your future bills, your future property tax bills, and your future insurance bills. And so a big chunk of that money is you just prepaying your bills. These aren't fees associated with buying a home. These are lenders saying, you don't have enough skin in the game. You don't have enough money down. I want to make sure you have the money to pay for these things that protect my investment. It has to be insured. If it burns down as the lender, I want my money back. If you don't pay the taxes, the lender moves into second position and the state can take the property on a tax lien. So in order to protect the lender's position, they want to make sure your taxes are paid. And they assume if you have less than 20% to put down, you don't have enough money maybe in the bank to keep up on these bills. They want to make sure they're paid for the first year to protect their investment. So that is you both paying a little bit of an insurance policy for the lender who's loaning you hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's also you just prepaying your bills. And these aren't just fees where people are kind of bleeding you dry and grabbing their piece of the pie here. The lion's share of this is you just prepaying your own bills in that closing cost chunk.
Right. And you bring up a good point, Rich. And typically, if you're buying a $500,000 house and if your fees were 2% as a lender, our fees are less than 0.5% fully disclosed, unless you're buying down your rate. I mean, you're under $1,500 in lender fees. Yes. Yeah. And so it's pretty nominal. Now, there's other fees because we're disclosing them to you and they're paid to other parties. It seems like we're charging those. We are not. We are disclosing them. We're required to disclose them to you. And there's a couple fees. And I was talking about the third fee is there's, as a lender, the only fee that we ever charge up front is the cost for the appraisal. And we're going to overestimate that cost. Typically, we say that's $800. It averages, $500 to $700, but we over disclose because if we tell you it's $400 and it comes in at $500, we have to pay the difference. We want to make sure we're not under disclosing fees. And then that's paid upfront, typically on a credit card. And the other set of fees are fees that you pay for inspections, things that you wouldn't show up necessarily on the closing statement. So, and Rich, I'll let you talk to that based on the age of the home, the disposition, where the property is. Your fees can vary in terms of inspections, right?
Yeah. So that to keep everybody organized, you have your down payment. That's cost everybody pretty much knows, and the minimum is going to be, unless you're a veteran and or can get down payment assistance, minimum is going to be about 3% there. You're going to have about 3% in closing costs. Some of you maybe did or didn't know that. So we use that $500,000 home purchase price a lot because it's a reasonable median for our area. So you're looking at your $15,000 for your down payment and $15,000 or less in closing costs. So that's $30,000 right there. Now you have to inspect the property, and we'll get into more about inspections in the section where we talk about buyer mistakes, because buyers make a lot of mistakes on inspections. But in terms of costs you don't know about, to properly inspect a urban or suburban property, you're going to spend about $1,600 ballpark in our area of Northern California. Dave and I work primarily in El Dorado County, Placer County, Sacramento County, Nevada County, Amador County, although Dave luckily can write loans in the entire state of California and the entire state of Nevada. I, for the most part, only work in those 5 counties, but I can refer you to a trusted professional elsewhere. I am regionally incompetent outside of those areas,
Yeah.
so I don't work in those areas. Well, you got something to add to that,
Well,
Dave?
just to a point, to not scare people away, and I think it's important to note in the market we're in, oftentimes we can negotiate a seller credit towards buyers' closing costs to buffer some of that
Correct.
3%. So don't think, okay, if I'm buying a $500,000 house, I have to have my 3% plus 3% closing costs, which is $30,000. Oftentimes we can, in this market, cushion that blow by asking the seller to give a buyer credit to cover the bulk, or if not all, of those closing costs often.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, this is episode 5 in our series of your 5 top questions you asked ChatGPT about real estate this year. Episode 2, I believe, was how do I afford a home in this market? And we talk about using credits to closing costs as a way to help with affordability. So you can watch that one. And then we also have one on negotiating, which I think was last week. I think it was episode 4. My hand's not on the camera. Episode 4. My hand was over here with Dave. Episode 4 was on negotiating. We talk about how negotiating for credits to closing costs can often be a bigger benefit than negotiating to purchase price. So watch those ones if you want a little more information on what Dave's talking about how to offset some of these fees. We have a lot of information for that in the Informed Home Buyer podcast playlist, which will be linked at the end of the video for you. So yeah, but that is a great point. You don't have to incur all of those costs. But when it comes to inspections, you can ballpark in a suburban or urban environment around $1,600. Now, if you're in the Bay Area of California, everything is damn near double in terms of inspectors down there. I'm helping a family member with a transaction down there. So you might ballpark $2,000 to $3,000 for a suburban or urban home if you're in the Bay Area for inspections. LA, very similar pricing. Now, if you're a rural property up in our area, El Dorado County, Placer, Amador, Nevada, you've also got septics and wells. So you're going to be closer to $2,000 to properly, fully inspect a property. We'll go into what that means in this next section of mistakes buyers make. But that's another category of cost. So you have maybe your $15,000 for down payment. You have your $15,000 for closing costs that we may or may not be able to negotiate away with some credits. And then you have your inspections at $1,600 to $2,000. Now, there are a couple of these we can shift to the seller side. Maybe $600-700 worth of them well and septic, we can often shift to the seller side. But you do need, call it $1,500 to $2,000 on hand to properly inspect a property. And that money is at risk. So when you purchase a property, you do put up 1% to 3% of the purchase price in an earnest money deposit. That money's protected and you get that back if you bail out before you remove your contingencies in writing. Again, this is how it works in California. Very different in other states. In other states, those contingencies automatically sunset at midnight on a certain date. But in California, we really do a good job of protecting the buyers, and you don't lose any deposit money unless you have signed it away. So, but that money you get back, but you don't get inspection money back. So $1,500 to $2,000 is basically, you can think of that as that is your financial risk on choosing any one property in the marketplace to move forward. Do you have something on that, Dave?
Yeah, one point to that is when you work with me and Rich, or if you were to work with another lender and realtor, we really work in concert together. So when we talk about on the home inspections, the $1,600 to $2,000, and on my side, the appraisal, we'll just say $600. That's not a guaranteed all at once. We usually are pragmatic about what inspections we get and what order, because if you walk into a property with Rich and he's got an eyebrow raise, he might say, hey, let's just get the home inspection first. And what's that typically run, Rich?
On a reasonable size home, around $500-600. Yeah.
Okay. So you pay that first. I would not order the appraisal until that home inspection's done, or I'd order the appraisal and say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Appraiser, don't go out there and inspect the property until, 24, 48 hours after that home inspection's done. Because if there is a red flag or something where the home inspector says, run from this house, I don't want you wasting $600 on an appraisal. And same with Rich, you're probably not going to have a couple of those other inspections done until you resolve maybe what those home inspection issues are. So we don't just have you write one big check up front. It's rolled out. You check the boxes as each inspection passes, you go on to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an important thing about the team you're working with. And we'll talk about this later in mistakes, but having an experienced team that understands the sales cycle and where the biggest red flags are likely to come up so they can pace that out. So you don't lose $2,000, move on to another property, have to spend another $2,000. Maybe you spent $500 on a home inspection. You found a deal killer, you moved on, your exposure was only $500. And that's something that if you have a good team that has your back and understands these things and can protect you, it limits a lot of that exposure. So it's a great point. Um, so that's down payment, closing costs, and inspection costs. Another thing that people don't factor in often enough is utilities. And so people just like, I'm buying a house, but often, usually you're buying a bigger house than you're living in now. Or you might be buying in a different area. You might be coming from an apartment where utilities are covered, or a rental where at least water and garbage is covered, or things like this. You haven't paid your own utilities yet, and you've like, okay, I'm going to have a $2,000, $2,500 mortgage bill, but you didn't factor in those utilities. And this can really get you in our area because we have some real strong dividing lines between cheap utilities, cheap, quote unquote, and not cheap utilities. So literally you have Folsom here and a 5-minute drive to El Dorado Hills here. Folsom's on SMUD. El Dorado Hills is on PG&E. PG&E is near double the SMUD rates. Roseville Electric, pretty much on par with SMUD rates. You drive a few minutes over to Rockland and you're back on PG&E. Boom, you've doubled. So even if you're moving just what feels like within your community, I'm moving from Roseville to Rockland. I might be going to the same, shopping at the same places, working at the same places. I haven't moved that far, but boom, you just doubled your monthly utility bills. And so things like City of Placerville water is astronomical versus being 10 minutes out of town on a well, where you're just paying a little bit of electricity for a pump. So you can ask the seller to provide you some utility bills to get an idea. Now, your mileage will vary because you might not run the house the way they do. You can also call some utility bills and get like a 6-month rolling average for what this house is spending. If you call, like, say, PG&E, I don't know if SMUD does that, but PG&E will. But you want to consider and factor in your utility bills in a home purchase in terms of your monthlies going in.
Yeah, that's really good point, Rich. And I think that's something as you're out driving someone, you've probably gone to 3 different counties or 4 in a single day where, you got, 3 or 4 different utility providers, especially when you're talking electric and you're talking water, garbage, sewer. Those can be way more expensive. And so as long as you kind of factor those in, and sometimes it's kind of built into the sales price too, is sometimes you might find that a house might be a little less expensive, but it's in an area where utilities are more. I mean, it could be vice versa, but, and also similar to that are insurance costs that we will advise you of. And oftentimes, if you locate a home and you're really interested in making an offer, you can get an insurance quote before even getting an accepted offer.
And should, particularly if you're in counties where we have high fire severity zones and high fire insurance. That's another hidden fee. And I talk about this in all of my, town videos that I do on the channel. But yeah, I mean, the difference between Folsom and El Dorado Hills in terms of insurance cost is going to be astronomical. You're probably able to still get insurance in the $2,000 to $3,000 annual premium range in Folsom, and you're going to be bare minimum $6,000 in El Dorado Hills, but probably closer to $8,000 to $10,000 on a lot of properties annual insurance premium. So when you stack it up, when you look at it, I have a town versus town playlist on the channel. So if you go to Rich Curtis, El Dorado County Realtor, click town versus town, you'll see El Dorado Hills versus Folsom, Folsom versus Roseville, Roseville versus Rockland, Placerville versus El Dorado Hills. And what's great in those is I break down these utility costs. When you stack up the 5-minute drive between El Dorado Hills and Folsom median home price around $750,000, El Dorado Hills around $980,000. Folsom SMUD, El Dorado Hills PG&E. Folsom cheaper fire insurance, El Dorado Hills astronomical fire insurance. The cost of living, the difference in that 5-minute drive, which is not going to make any difference in your life in terms of commute or whatever. And schools, you look at the school scores, El Dorado Hills amazing schools, Folsom amazing schools. But the cost of living is massively higher. Most of the time, I do not select a winner in these town versus town videos. But from a financial perspective, there's a lot of people that compare Folsom and El Dorado Hills, and El Dorado Hills is a clear loser and Folsom is a clear winner when you stack up all those additional fees. And so are those hidden fees? No, those are public. They're knowable. But if you don't have that knowledge, you need to get educated. So use a local professional who can walk you through this stuff, and watch those town versus town videos if you just want to do it at home, if you're in the information gathering phase. But yeah, insurance and utilities can be a massive monthly difference for you.
Yeah, and two other fees, Rich, and I don't know if we'll get to those, but a good time to bring up county to county utility fees. But if you're going from El Dorado County, may have fewer Mello Roos fees than what you might find in Folsom. So when you buy, your actual property tax bill or levy on that bill might be more expensive. I don't know if it's enough to offset the cost of utilities, but there are some trade-offs there with those utility fees.
Yeah, if you're really trying to compare like El Dorado Hills and Folsom, or even a Placerville to move to Folsom, when you start looking at the acquisition price you can get, you got to factor in Mello Roos and HOAs and all that. But very often you can buy more home in Folsom than you could in the foothills, just because of how much additional fees there are living in the foothills. But let's break that down. In El Dorado County, the vast majority of homes are not in an HOA or planned unit development. We still have them. You got Serrano and Blackstone in El Dorado Hills. You've got, even as high as Camino, you've got Rancho del Sol, and as high as Pollock Pines, you've got Goldridge Forest and Sierra Springs. So we do have 8 places with HOA fees. Mello Roos are very non-existent or low once you get past El Dorado Hills. El Dorado Hills does have communities with Mello Roos. Folsom, the vast majority of communities that you're going to look in are going to have HOA and Mello Roos. HOAs are usually pretty reasonable, $150 to $250 a month in most places in Folsom, but some Mello Roos can be $500-$600 a month, either in El Dorado Hills or Folsom, or some of the new builds in Roseville, and that's not insignificant. So Mello Roos is a builder is passing on the cost of community infrastructure, sidewalks, sewers, streetlights, all this business. They're passing that on to the end purchaser via a taxable bond that's levied against the property for a certain number of years, but that's often 20 to 30 years. So, most of the time you're going to be paying this. If it ever had it on it, you're still paying it. So yeah, that can be a significant additional fee, the HOA and Mello Roos fees, if you're buying in a planned unit development. And if that's going to be a deal breaker for you, you just got to tell your agent, I don't want to look in any of these places. And Dave, speak to that from a debt to income ratio perspective too. How much less house you can buy if you have 500 Mello Roos and 250 HOA.
Yeah.
That and you're on the ragged edge on your debt to income ratio. That reduces your purchase price, correct? That you can go
it certainly does. And as a lender, we typically use 1.25% of the purchase price for property taxes. So your actual property taxes could be lower, they could be higher, but we just use a standard for qualifying. So that's property taxes. Now, when you get into HOA, we know what that is up front, and we use actuals. And so the difference between a $150 HOA or a $500 HOA is significant. And so we have a lot of buyers that, come to us, and maybe they're kind of on the threshold of qualifying for what they want to look for. And they're like, oh, I'll just buy a condo because it's $100,000 cheaper or $50,000 cheaper. I'll just go with the condo. Well, your payment oftentimes will be higher with that condo, because when you build in the HOA, which can be significant, and there's no caps on those HOAs necessarily,
they can go up, and they can and do go up over time.
Yeah. And I've seen condos, and I've, condos where, go back 15 years, the HOA was $120. Now it's $360.
They also have the ability, if you're in an HOA, you should know they have the ability to levy at any time one-time additional fees. So I've got a client in a condo complex right now. The whole sewer system for the entire complex is shot, and they're asking for a $4,000 one-time fee from every resident to fund the account to replace that sewer. So at any time in an HOA, you can get slapped with an out of the blue bill.
Yeah. And so, and then there are some places where there's HOAs and it's not a condo, and you're not subject to those fees. And like Rich talking, they're like a PUD, private urban development. I think that's the acronym.
Planned unit development.
Planned urban development, yes. And so where you're going to have some HOA fees, and maybe they do some things like they take care of the some of the parks and some of the landscape in between the roads, and
the clubhouse, or they plow the roads up here in Snow Country.
Yeah, and where I live, they mow the front lawn and they do some other stuff, or
Yeah.
Serrano, they may take care of the front yard landscape, or they got a security person that drives around that is supposed to be a threat. But if you've seen these folks, I hope they're not watching this. They're not going to scare anyone away. So
Yeah, when they pull you over for speeding in there, you ask them, "Oh, where's your law enforcement license? What have you had your radar gun calibrated? When's the last time the speedometer on that 1982 Ford Ranger you just pulled me over in was calibrated?" Like
yeah,
those guys, yeah, they crack me up. All right,
yeah.
that's an aside. Our lack of respect for
Yeah.
HOA security folks.
And then when we were talking, right, when we were talking property taxes, and I don't know if we'll get to that. The one other fee is I talked about recurring closing costs, paying your property taxes up front. The one bill that everyone always gets, or almost everyone gets, especially in markets that have appreciated, are a supplemental tax bill. And that comes
Yes.
anywhere from 1 month to, I've seen it, 8 to 10 months after you close the transaction. And that's the difference between the tax rate of what you bought the house for and what the seller's property tax basis is. Because when you close the transaction, there are oftentimes the county assessor's office hasn't reassessed the property based on your purchase price. So there could be a delta of anywhere, from hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars. We could have a general idea what the previous owner bought the home for and what their tax basis is, and give you a general idea what your supplemental tax bill will look like. And we get a lot of calls of people saying, "Oh my gosh, I got this tax bill. I thought my taxes were part of my mortgage payment." It's a one-time deal. And oftentimes, or there is enough in what we call your impound or escrow account to pay that as well, depending on how much that is. But we will prepare you for that. And that's just another example of agents and lenders educating you on what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, and this can be really significant in some cases. So, you got someone who bought in 2021 and you're buying in 2025. You got $1,500 supplemental bill or whatever. But when you look at other places, and I know we have a lot of Bay Area folks that watch this, based on our stats there in the YouTube studio. If you've got someone who bought their house in San Jose in 1979 for the cost of a Tesla Model S, it's like $125,000 house, right? And they've been on Prop 13 the whole darn time. So they've had maybe their 2% a year increase, and that's it. They never did a big remodel or pulled the permit or triggered any reassessment, right? They might be paying, taxes on 300, 500 grand now in 2025. But that house is now worth 1.7 million. And you buy it at 1.7 million, you're paying their $500,000 tax assessment tax rate. And then you get your supplemental on your 1.7 million. That can be a real big hit, a real big bill. So paying attention to how long the person, this is a good question to always ask your agent. When did they buy this house? Right? Because if they bought this house a long, long time ago, you're going to get hit with a real big supplemental tax bill. You need to prepare for that. There's not a lot of people that have the wherewithal to buy a house, move, buy new furniture, pay all the fees involved, and then get spanked with a $6,000, $7,000 supplemental bill, a few months down the road. That hurts. So you really want to pay attention to the delta between when they bought it and when you bought it, because in certain markets, especially markets that have rapidly appreciated, all your Bay Area markets, your San Francisco's, your San Jose's, all of those, or your LA's, things like that. This can hurt.
Yeah, and I think for qualified realtors and mortgage professionals to educate you, we don't want to scare you away from buying a home. We still think it's a great investment. And that's a whole other podcast of benefits of home ownership, but we want to educate you on that. It's not to scare you away, and we'll get you as close as possible on those numbers.
Yeah. Yep. The last one on our list, this one's associated with HOAs. There are some places like in Folsom, some of the Parkway developments, some of the other developments where I don't know how they got away with it, but these HOAs got the right to charge you a private transfer fee, which means that you buy into this place. And then when it comes time down the road to sell, you owe the HOA 1% of the purchase price back paid to the HOA in a private transfer fee. So if you were a seller, and all of you who are buying, this is the Informed Home Buyer podcast. Most of you are buyers, but eventually you're going to be sellers. And this is sort of a way you screw over your future self if you're not paying attention to these things. So if you're ballparking your cost of sale at 5 or 6% real estate or realtor fees and 1% in title fees, so you're ballparking your future sales costs at 6 to 7% ballpark. Well, now it's actually 7 to 8% because you have this 1% private transfer fee. So that's something to pay attention to as well. If you're buying into any kind of an HOA or plan unit development community, that is, in my opinion, of all the fees we've talked about, the two most hidden fees are that supplemental tax bill and those private transfer fees that occur in these HOA communities. So it's something to watch out for as well, and ask your realtor as part of your due diligence period, as part of reviewing the HOA documentation and rules, are there private transfer fees for this community?
Yeah,
so
good.
I think we'll transition now to the other part of this question, which is what are the biggest mistakes buyers make? And I think by now, you've just heard Dave and I, between us, brain dump collectively, 46-ish years of real estate experience. And if you don't have that behind you in your team, you're not going to know about all these things. You're not going to remember all these things from our podcast while you're in the middle of buying your house. And you're going to get some nasty surprises along the way. So in my opinion, the biggest mistake people make is picking the wrong representation. And I don't necessarily have a dog in this fight, in this conversation, because people watch this podcast from all over the country, even all over the world, which has been surprising. We've got international viewers as well, which is kind of cool. But so wherever you are, you should be choosing a representative that's been in the business for 10 years or more. And let me tell you why. And there's two reasons. First reason, shocking statistic, 87% of realtors will be out of the business in the first 5 years. It has the highest attrition rate of almost any career in the United States. You think of the worst industry, you can think of a restaurant. Restaurants have a 75% fail rate in the first 5 years. It is harder to become a successful realtor than it is to become a successful restaurateur. Just let that settle for a second, right? Like, you talk to any entrepreneur, and unless they're absolutely passionate about food, the least business they ever want to be involved with is restaurants or food service. Okay. So if you're dealing with someone who's been in this business less than 5 years, likelihood is they are not going to be in the business moving forward, which means when problems crop up, you no longer have a trusted professional. You no longer have somebody who remembers or cares about your transaction, who can help you out with these things. Number two, all that 46 years of brain dumping about all these, bills and things that go wrong in transactions. That is everything that's happened to Dave and I, everything that's gone wrong, all the million fires we've put out on, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of transactions by now between the two of us. And each one of those things that goes wrong, we learn a little bit more, we get a little bit better, and we can get out ahead of things. We are essentially professional problem solvers and professional cat herders, the two of us. That's what we actually do. Now, if you have someone in the business less than 10 years, they are not going to have had enough things go wrong to be able to get out ahead of the problems for you and advise you in that way. Would you agree, Dave?
100%. And that's almost present and visible instantaneously when you are working with someone like me or Rich. And if you've just came to us and we're the first people you've worked with and you hadn't worked with anyone else, often you've come to us from either the channel or from a referral, and you've gotten, glowing reviews, but sometimes you don't know how good you have it. That's not to pat us on the back, but there's often a lot of fires we put out, mistakes we solve that you're not even aware of. We don't even bring it necessarily to your attention. But instantly when we have conversations, if you're a buyer and you're working with us, our conversations with the listing agent that conveys this information to their seller, we already communicate our expertise and subtly share with them that, hey, we're prepared to deal with just about anything because we have the experience to do so. And that gives them a tremendous amount of confidence, especially if there's multiple offers like, hey, these guys know what's going on. They're going to solve these problems and they're going to communicate. And that's really key here, is to, just sweeping things under the rug. They don't go away. We got to address them, communicate them, and figure out how we're going to solve them. And we could spend 10 podcasts talking about all the things that we've done and the fires we've put out. So
maybe we should just do a no kidding, there I was, like a horror stories podcast. We should put that on the list. That'd be a fun one.
And by the way, that includes, and if there's other realtors watching this, how we handle other realtors and their personality types and other, there's a whole art to that as well that you're going to get based on our experience negotiating, experience working with these folks, understanding their hot buttons. And I know there's another podcast about that as well. In terms of
last week's, in fact. If you look at episode 4, we talked deeply about that. On that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's how you approach those problems. And, I think you use the phrase, use kid gloves when you're approaching and making it obvious, and that your intention is to solve the problem, not just point out the problem.
Yeah, so, not blow up a deal over a problem. Yeah,
right, correct.
Yeah, no, this Saturday, so if you're getting anything out of this podcast, if you've been with us this long, hit the like button, click subscribe, hit that little bell icon so you get notified of all our upcoming videos. This Saturday, I have a video coming out of 5 red flags that let you know you're working with the wrong realtor. And so that goes through 5 quick ways you can tell if you're working with someone who has the experience to get you through this or not. Because I can't tell you the number of calls Dave and I both get throughout the year. These are not calls that result in any transactions or money for us, but it's somebody who's a friend of one of our clients who's in the middle of a real estate transaction that is all screwed up, and they need help to figure out how to sort it out. And 90% of the time or better, I can point to this being a human problem, this being an issue with inexperienced agents or arrogant agents, or, all of this was avoidable. And so unraveling those problems is sort of a free service we end up doing throughout the year, but you can avoid those problems by picking the right representation. That's why the number one mistake I think buyers make is picking the wrong representation. And where this really happens is, oh man, my brother just got his real estate license, or my cousin just got their real estate license, or my friend's husband is a realtor. And I appreciate that loyalty. My business has been built over the last 21 years on loyalty like that. But the truth of the matter is, if that person just got their license, you really shouldn't be trusting them with the largest financial transaction of your life. So here's a way you can still honor them, help them build their business, but get better representation for yourself. You go out, you find someone who's been in the business 10 years or longer, and you have your brother, cousin, friend's wife refer you to that agent. They're going to get a 25% referral fee back in their pocket that gets them a little money. They can stay sort of involved and follow on the transaction, see what happens. You've honored their time, but you've created a relationship with someone who can actually get the job done and not cost you tens of thousands of dollars with big mistakes. So if you do have someone in your life that you want to honor in that way, be upfront with a realtor you contact. Let them know I'm always willing to make that referral fee so that you get good representation and you still get to honor your relationships, and everybody gets what they need.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Rich. And I think that kind of dovetails into, trusting someone that's been in the business as long as you have, to recommend the types of inspections to get. When, the type of property, and don't forego a certain inspection, because that will potentially be a major hidden cost that you just don't have the reserves or the resources to solve after the transaction closes. So point is, don't step over dollars to pick up pennies, whether you're, choosing a realtor or choosing a lender, because we will uncover and guide you, around areas that are currently unknown to most folks, but based on our experience, we're familiar with.
Yeah. So that is the second largest mistake buyers make that can cost them tens of thousands of dollars, is cheaping out on inspections, not doing the full slate of recommended inspections, or not having a realtor who can recommend the right inspections. So 2 stories on this, one old one current one. One of my earliest transactions was down in, old parts of Sacramento. The clients were first-time buyers with a baby on the way. They didn't have a lot of money. I told them, you got to do a sewer lateral inspection. The sewers down here are made out of like Orangeburg, it turns into paper. They get riddled with tree roots. That's a $250 inspection in today's market. Back then it was maybe $125. They didn't do the inspection. They didn't want to do it. They didn't have the money. And like a month in, the sewer started backing up into their tub. They got a new baby. Now they can't bathe the baby because they have sewer backing up into their tub. They started pulling up, and it soaked the carpet. So they started pulling out the carpet, and the tree roots had gone through the Orangeburg, up through the toilet seal, under the carpet, and literally the tree roots were ripping pieces of the subfloor off in their bathroom. It was that bad. And it ended up costing them $5,000-$6,000 all up to fix that problem. That had they done $100 inspection, we could have had the seller pay for all of that.
Yeah, and that was $5,000 or $6,000 back then. Would have been twice as much today, is my guess. So.
Yeah, just replacing a sewer lateral with no other problems now is probably closer to $8,000 in today's money.
Yeah.
And if you had the subfloor problem and resetting the toilet and the wax seal and all that, you're probably going to be $10,000 all up on a job like that.
Yeah, crappy situation to be in. See what I did there? Yeah.
Yeah. way to go. Nothing builds credibility like an old man pun.
Right. Yes. I tell my kids all the time. I tell them dad joke before they have a chance to say it. So
yeah. Awesome. And then a current story, I just had someone buy one of my listings that did basically a septic inspection, a home inspection. That's it, and remove contingencies. Great for my seller, but for a buyer, I would have done a roof inspection, a home inspection, the septic inspection, a sewer lateral inspection, an HVAC inspection, and a pest inspection. That's what I would have recommended to my buyer. So different representation there. Their representative said, do these two, you're good. And I would have said, do these other five. Now, I would have cost you an extra $1,000 in inspections, but potentially saved you tens and tens of thousands of dollars in repairs. You can choose your own adventure there, but cheaping out on inspections, I think, is the number two most costly mistake buyers make.
Yeah, and one really important point on that, Rich, is when, and a new agent may not know this, when you write the contract and based on what market we're in, you may waive some inspections, but that doesn't mean you don't do them, right? Like you're waiving them on the contract, but that doesn't mean you don't do them to educate yourself as the buyer. And you have every right to do so. You're just not going to come back to the seller on the result specifically of that inspection. So,
yeah. And even if you're not waiving them, you may not be asking the seller to pay for them, but that doesn't mean you don't have the right to do them and then negotiate on them down the road. So you might be not asking the seller to pay for all of these. We had another transaction recently where we were with some elderly clients. It would have been a real hardship for them to do the inspection. So my buyer said, you know what, I'll pay for the well and septic. I'll handle it for you. They took on an extra $700 or so in inspections to make it easier on the seller. That made the deal happen. But if we found something major in those, it doesn't mean they can't negotiate on it. It just means, well, I'll pay for that. I'll take on the work of that, So yeah, lots of ways to skin that cat, but you want the information, and you want the information in a time frame in which you can make an informed decision on the property. And I'll say in 21 years, very rare that an inspection finding has blown up a deal, once or twice. And these have been like catastrophic things, like cracked foundations that are heaved high enough to trip on, 3,000 gallon spring fed cisterns in a basement that there's no way to ever stop that water. These are really random, crazy things. Most of the time, these things are solvable and we get a little credit and you do some repairs and it's not that big of a deal, but you got to know. So we've got picking the right representation and cheaping out on inspections. Those are the two top buyer mistakes. Another one is getting snowballed by pretty finishes. And this can make you make two poor decisions. One, a poor decision about the rest of the things that are wrong with the house, and another, a poor decision about neighborhood. So we'll break that down. Flippers oftentimes, and Dave has flipped houses, but he does a really thorough job on the bones and the systems of the house. I've never sold a flip for Dave that had a bad roof or an old HVAC system, but a lot of flippers will do that sort of thing. They know that what actually brings in the money isn't a new roof and isn't a new HVAC system. It's a pretty kitchen and pretty bathrooms. So some flippers will spend all their money there and they'll leave the original HVAC and they'll leave the original roof, or they'll leave the original galvanized plumbing. I had a flip in the La Rive area where they made it super pretty, but the water barely flowed because it was all like clogged galvanized plumbing under there. So don't get distracted by pretty finishes. You still want to do all those inspections and make sure. And someone like myself can walk through the house and be like, that roof is shot or really, really old, even though it looks nice on the inside. That HVAC system is old as dirt, right? Or turn on the faucet. See, there's no water flow in this place because I know it was built in the 50s and they didn't do the plumbing. So don't convince yourself that, I'll take on those big ticket items because the house looks so pretty. It's way cheaper and way easier to pretty up a house than to deal with all the systems of the house.
Yeah, really good point, Rich. And, I think you've walked into a house and for someone that's maybe been in the trades or flipped houses, the phrase is lipstick on a pig. And, and so you just want to, but it could be super. I just went with some friends this past weekend and looked at a flip property that they were interested in. I walked in there and within 3 minutes, I was able to very quickly identify problematic things. And that was things that were on the walls out, had nothing to do with not looking in the attic, not looking at the HVAC system, not looking at the plumbing or the electrical. So I was able to identify things that were issue that a typical person wouldn't necessarily notice. But Rich, you've seen enough houses when you're walking through, you'll just, mental note on that and point that out. So a buyer doesn't get, overwhelmed with the pretty finishes there.
Yeah, I think it's easy to do to get a little starstruck by the pretty finishes, but a good rule in life, and I tell my kids this all the time: if a deal's too good to be true, then it is too good to be true. It's not a good deal. And so, if you're looking at a house that is an absolute standout in terms of fit and finish for that area and for that price, then there's probably something else going on. And usually that's either they flipped it and did a lipstick on a pig remodel and they didn't address the systems of the house, or they have flipped a house and made it really pretty in a marginal area or a neighborhood you might not want to live in, or a neighborhood that won't appreciate well for you. And this is happening a lot right now with the high cost, acquisition cost of houses right now. There's not a lot of meat on the bone or money to be made for flippers in this market in a lot of cases. So a lot of them have started to break their own rules. If I was out bird dogging flips for Dave, I had a whole list of rules that I'm not going to get a house on a major street. I'm not going to get a house in a bad neighborhood. I'm not going to get a house with high tension power lines right over the house or in the backyard or in the view shed of that house. There's a list of rules you just don't break because you're going to get screwed down the road on money. And flippers are breaking all of those rules right now in today's market because it's the only way to get something that will pencil. And so right now, often if you're looking at a house that's really beautiful inside and way more beautiful than all the other houses you've looked at for that price, check out the neighborhood, dig into the crime maps, do a little due diligence. It's very likely you're looking at a house in a marginal neighborhood that you don't really necessarily want to live or invest in. And if you convince yourself to make that choice because of the pretty finishes, that is definitely going to cost you a lot of money and heartache and pain down the road. So I think that's our last one for today, but I'm seeing that happen a lot right now, marginal flips and buyers getting, starstruck by the finishes at that price point and not taking into consideration, this isn't a real great place to be putting your money.
Yeah. Good point, Rich. And I know we can go on for the next, hour here on this. So
yeah.
I'll leave the rest of you here if we want to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it, folks. We've covered the biggest costs and bills that you might not know are coming. We've covered the biggest buyer mistakes. Make sure you have good, high quality representation that's been in the business 10 years or more. Don't cheap out on inspections, and don't get sort of starstruck or blindsided by pretty finishes and miss the fact that the bones are crappy, the systems are crappy, or the neighborhood is crappy. Those are the biggest mistakes I see buyers make that cost them the most money in this market or any market. If you've made it this far with us, you are deeply committed to your financial and real estate education, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next one. I'm Rich Curtis.
And I'm Dave Miller. Thanks, Rich.
All right. Bye, everyone.